Good morning, folks. Hope you're having a great day today. Today, I'm going to take a look at H.G. Wells' short story, The Stolen Bacillus. He self-published it in 1895 in a collection of short stories, of about 15 or 16 short stories, all in the science fiction genre, that he self-published. And the self-published title actually uses The Stolen Bacillus as the title and other works, and so forth. So you can check it out there. It's also considered a very strong story. For example, in this collection, it's considered it, along with a bunch of other, people by Robert Heinlein, Isaac Asimov, and so forth, are all in here, and such. It is a part of public domain, so I'll link you to it later on so you can read it yourself because of when it was written and so forth. But today I want to take a look at it a little bit, give you an opportunity to get sort of a brief sort of summary of it in case you're interested. It's also a very quick read. In this collection, it's 7 pages, and this is a normal novel-sized book. So obviously, it's going to be fine in this novel and such, and you can read it in probably 15 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, because H.G. Wells, if you're not used to H.G. Wells' writing. But that's it. I mean, it wouldn't even take you half an hour to read. In fact, there are links to it. I actually found a place on YouTube where somebody had actually read it, and it was like 18 minutes long. So you can actually go and listen to it if you want to. It's not going to take long at all to read or to listen to. So I'm not going to spend too much time reviewing it because it's a 7-page short story. There's not going to be a whole lot for me to review, and so forth. But what I do want to take a look is kind of take a look at this, unpack it, also talk a little about H.G. Wells too as a writer, since this is the first time we've talked about him in my channel. Now, H.G. Wells, and this channel, of course, is dedicated to unpacking either famous or classic works in science fiction, fantasy, and horror that people have forgotten about. And obviously, H.G. Wells is a classic of science fiction. But there are going to be many works that most people today may not be familiar with, at least not as much as them. Now, obviously, H.G. Wells will not be a new name for anyone who's a fan of science fiction. So if you're turning into this channel, you're probably somebody who already knows who H.G. Wells is. You've read several of his things. You appreciate that he was one of the first people to bring a lot of different things to the table, from the first invasion stories in War of the Worlds to the first time travel story in the Time Machine and so forth. So he brought a lot of these sort of imaginative worlds and imaginative ideas, the Island of Dr. Moreau, and so forth. So he's definitely somebody who has really impacted the genre. Now, there's another person who's writing about the same time, Jules Verne, who is a French guy. Jules Verne also has a lot of very famous works too. He from the Thousand Leagues Under the Sea to Around the World and so forth. So Jules Verne has a number of different stories too, many of which are science fiction. Well, now Jules Verne is going to be a very strong critic of H.G. Wells. They're not going to get along. and basically he sees H.G. Wells as a lazy science fiction writer because he doesn't, and the reason is because Jules Verne is a hard science fiction writer. He'll do research, he'll come up with scientific ways to make the story work, and whereas H.G. Wells, on the other hand, will do nothing of the same. He is just a soft science fiction writer. He'll just invent something or come up with some way to get you into the story, and then he's just going to move on. So you get to the story that he wants to write, and so forth. And an example of this, and it's a famous example of this too, because they both wrote the same sort of story early on. They both write a story where people from Earth are going to visit the moon. And so forth. So they both write that sort of a moon journey, and each of them are a novel. Now, what Jules Verne is going to do is he's going to research the how to get them there, come up with a reasonable, plausible way based on the science of his day. Basically, having them construct a big giant cannon that's going to fire a vehicle with enough speed, force, and so forth to get them past the gravity barrier of the world and thus get them to the moon. So he creates this big, giant, scientifically legitimate cannon, and so forth. Whereas H.G. Wells just has his scientists develop a brand new element that's lighter than air, so he can just make them out of it, float them on up there, and then move on. That's who he is that's who Wells is as a science fiction writer. He's a soft science fiction writer. He's not a hard science fiction writer. And so I know a lot of people may call Wells the father of, or the grandfather, and have these different terms for these two, but I kind of consider Wells to be the father of soft science fiction and Verne to be the father of hard science fiction. And I think they would probably both agree with me, having that sort of a retrospective look at them, and so forth. So that's who Wells is. He's somebody who will just create something, a sort of a scientific sort of workaround to get him where he wants to be. and to write the story that he wants to write. And there's nothing wrong with that. Lots of great writers will come along, probably the most famous of which is Doom. And by Robertson, but there's a lot by Frank Herbert, and there's many other examples of classic sort of a soft science fiction works out there too. So there's nothing wrong with Wells as a science fiction writer who's more on the soft side of life, and Jules Verne's more on the hard side of life. There's nothing wrong with either one of them or their approaches. Both of them are going to have incredibly strong works. They're going to create brand new ways of seeing things from science fiction. They're both going to sort of create the genres, and so forth. But that's who Wells is. So again, we're going to take a look at the Stolen Bacillus, which is again just 7 pages long. It won't take you that long to read. And in the Stolen Bacillus, what you're going to be introduced to is a main character who's a scientist, and he has this person who's going to be coming in and taking a tour of his facility. Now, what he's going to do is he's a scientist, so he's got various germs that he's working on, and basically as a part of this, what he's going to say is, hey, one of these test tubes that I have with this thing in it is actually a version that we've been able to make in the lab of human cholera. Now, of course, human cholera is a nasty disease, and so forth. So it's something that would be really, really difficult to, if it got out there and so on and so forth. But you can certainly understand why there would be lab reasons to have cholera. If you can infect creatures with it, you might be able to come up with, treatments for cholera or something like that, right? So you can obviously understand that there could be some scientific reasons to have manufactured cholera in sort of this vial, this sealed off vial, and so forth. So he kind of shows this test tube to this person and talks about, cholera and so forth. And then what winds up happening is that the person is actually going to steal the vial, and he's going to go flee, and he's going to find out this person is actually an anarchist. Anarchists are basically a group of people that want to kind of bring the system down and so forth. He didn't realize that the person who was there had gotten through to the lab was an anarchist, but then the anarchist flees and so forth. And so there's going to be a chase scene with buggies, not cars, because the cars weren't around yet in 1895. So it could be a buggy chase scene and so forth. But there's going to be a chase scene where our scientist is going to chase the person who stole the bacillus, so forth. And then you're going to get a resolution on the last 2 pages. So again, I'm not going to get you all the way there of what happens or what the anarchist is trying to do with this vial and so forth. But I think you'll enjoy the little bit of a Wellsian ending that happens. That's it. And if you're familiar with War of the Worlds, so you're going to be familiar with what a Wellsian ending is, you're probably going to know where I'm going with it, so you'll be fine. And so forth. But there you go. That's it, in probably a quick little minute. That's the summary of the entire story. But what I really like here, though, is this idea of him sort of predicting germ warfare and so forth. This is really the first time that we kind of saw this idea of, you being able to create a test tube that has a bacteria in it that if you unleash it, you are destroying an entire place. And while germ warfare, sort of existed in sort of a general sense previously, for example, during ancient sieges, during the Middle Ages and so forth, they would catapult over like diseased animals into cities in order to kill the people inside the city. So in that sense, sure, germ warfare certainly would have existed in a sort of general sense, right? But this sort of scientized, anesthetized very quickly way of killing people, which you could do by taking a test tube and just, of a nasty disease and then either infecting one person, that one person just walking into that city and then living for a while and then everybody dies in it, or by, sort of tainting the water supply, the food supply and so forth, just releasing it if it's an airborne agent, and so forth, just dropping it on the ground will be enough. So there's a lot of these sort of nasty sort of germ warfare options that have now been created on the sort of the science fiction table at least. And so I do think that Wells should be getting some credit, I think, for sort of creating this sort of germ warfare idea, sort of a modern take on catapulting, diseased cattle and so forth across a city wall and such. So this is the Stolen Bacillus by H.G. Wells. I've already been about 9 minutes so far, so if you've watched this video, you'd probably be 2/3 of the way through the story by now. So I'll go ahead and leave you with that. Let me know what you think about it in the comments below. I'll be happy to engage you with it more. If you like this video, there's no reason not to hit that subscribe button. As I mentioned, there's a lot more of these reviews to follow. And thank you so much for your time for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. We all have such busy days and busy lives. So the fact you spent some of that time with me is something I really do appreciate. So thanks.